Over the last 15 years, I coached hundreds of people in person, thousands went through my training courses, and here are the 7 common errors that hold people from breaking 1500 rating barrier. We're gonna go over a game played by players rated around 1500, and we'll see what are those common points of improvement. Alright, so here's the game between Tejas against Sohan Ganesh, played in Mumbai Wealth Opening. Not sure what that tournament is, but sounds cool. If you ever played that, let me know. If you ever took part in that tournament. So we're seeing here the Scandinavian defense, and let me start from this point. Actually, I don't like too much the opening choice of black. Like, I understand what they're trying to do. Like, typically they're playing e6, knight of 6, knight d7, the queen slides back to c7, and we're getting something similar to the London system. If you imagine the other pawn on d5, that would be exactly the London system, all right? And there is advantage to playing schematic, like simple openings where you just put up a system and you don't think about it. However, the big downside is that it's a little bit passive. And I would recommend that you play active openings, like more aggressive openings when you attack. Like I remember back in the day, when I was like about 11 years old or something, I was rated about 2200 and I got a new coach. And that coach told me that I'm playing dull openings, that I should start playing gambits and aggressive openings. And sure enough, as I did that, my rating basically skyrocketed and I became an international master within the next like 1-2 years. And after that, I kept moving up. So that really made a big difference because chess, like, you win in chess by attacking. Like, that is the most essential skill. You can't get any further in chess unless you learn how to attack properly. And you learn the skill and you practice the skill by playing active openings that prompt you to become an aggressive player. Versus if you play this kind of Londonish systems, like, it's not that easy to move forward and attack, right? So that's the first thing that I dislike about this. Bishop d2, black went queen to c7. Now, again, I got it. I got the point after bishop d2, since the bishop x raised the queen, black wants to put it back to safety. And although it is an okay move to play, generally speaking, I would play something else instead, because right now there is no immediate danger. And there is another common rule which states backward is awkward. Like basically in chess, you wish to attack, you wish to go forward. Now, of course, sometimes you have to go back just to avoid losing material, but unless it is really forced, you do not want to play those moves. And that is why I'm saying backward is awkward. So you do play those moves only when they're forced, and you have to play them because you otherwise lose something. And here queen c7 at the moment is not forced, and black could have played something else instead. Anyway, let's keep going. Queen c7, knight of 3, knight of 6. And of course, I hope that you do understand we're talking about those universal principles. They will apply to any other openings or any other games that you play. White castles, pawn e6, so far so good. Rook e1, white puts a rook to the semi-open file, makes sense. Bishop d6, h3. Okay, and black actually responded pawn h6, which is interesting. Now, let me tell you one more thing. I think that quite often, like, the problem that you're experiencing is not lack of knowledge about chess. You do know a lot. If you've been playing for months or maybe years, you do know a ton of ideas about chess. And what confuses people is usually a lack of clarity, lack of priorities. Because in this position, we could easily come up with a ton of moves and they all would make some sense. Like black could play h6 as he did in the game to provide some escape square for the bishop or something. Black could go knight d7 or maybe castle, maybe b5 to hit the bishop, maybe bishop g6 to just secure the bishop against some sort of attacks, right? So there are a number of moves and they all would make some sense, and maybe there are more that you can come up with, all right? So the question is, so what is the move that you should play? In order to answer that question, it's not enough to just know a bunch of rules about chess. You need to understand priorities, which then is the most important, okay? And in terms of priorities, in an opening you wish to develop your pieces. Development is the priority. That's what you should be doing. And any move that is not development, like, you should question the necessity of it. And you should second guess it, like think twice before actually playing that move out. h6 maybe is useful to some extent, but certainly is not that critical. And by the way, it's interesting that they both played this mistake. For white, h3 certainly was equally unnecessary. So as black. They both like mimicked the mistake of their opponent. And therefore, like, should have castled, which actually brings us to the other very useful rule to keep in mind. Like, normally, you need to castle within 10 moves, right? That secures your king against any early attacks. And again, that just comes down to development, castling, and castles within 10 moves. All right, so h6, I do not like the move because although it might be useful in some variations, that was not the most important thing to do right now. White played queen e2. By the way, let's take it to the next level. So far we talked about the opening. In an opening, you need to develop castle within 10 moves. Pretty clear. All right. What should you do after that? You're playing the middle game. So for white, it is already a middle game. They finalized the opening stage. What should you do then? The answer is, again, what is the priority? Because for white, you can equally find 10 different moves that would make some sense. So the question is, what is the right thing to do, right? Now, the right thing to do in a middle game is to attack. Now, that is a generic term, and to make it more specific, we got to understand what it actually means. And what it means is to move forward and create threats. That is an attack. Therefore, the question white should have asked themselves is, how do I move my pieces forward and create threats? Nice thing about that is that usually there aren't that many options if you start thinking about that. Like, how can white move something forward and create a threat? Think about this. There's g4, possibly, although it weakens the white king. Then knight d4 hits the bishop. Knight h4 hits the bishop as well. But from these two, I definitely pick knight d4 because, generally speaking, I wish to move towards the center. Right, so let me take this away. So it's either g4 or knight d4. Like, these are the two moves that white should consider, and if one of them works, meaning results into an attack, that's what you should play. If none of these moves work, then you can play something else. There's maybe also knight e4 that puts a little bit of pressure on black, all right? So that's the third one. And g4 I don't like too much because it weakens the king and bishop can just go back. Therefore, I pick between knight to d4, hitting this bishop, or knight e4, attacking the knight at least, threatening to ruin the pawn structure. Right, so these are the two. And knight e4 looks especially good because it hits the bishop. And if the bishop moves, thanks to this strong pressure and thanks to black delaying his castling, white can sacrifice something on e6, whether a knight or a bishop. Not sure what's better, maybe a bishop so that it's more forced, like this. And now knight to c7 is a threat, but if the queen moves, there are all kinds of discovered checks along the e-file. Knight takes g7 or knight c7 going after the rook, and white will probably win the game on the spot. So that's what white should have played. Instead, he played queen e2, a normal move, but again, not the most important thing to do. All right, after this, black castles, and now I played knight e4. Okay, makes sense. Black played bishop e7. Now, let me ask you about this. What do you think about the move bishop e7? Is this a good move, a bad move, or an okay move? Now, like, strictly speaking, of course, it is an okay move. It doesn't change the situation drastically. However, remember one of the first rules we talked about, backward is awkward? Whenever you move your piece back, you always need to question whether there is really a necessity to do that. Like, if we wish to just guard this knight on f6, you could play knight d7, which would provide this support, and you would also complete your development and feel good about your position. Like, yeah, he could trade a bishop or a knight, but they are guarded, therefore you would just recapture and the game goes on. So I would definitely prefer knight d7 over bishop e7 in principle, because generally speaking you do not wish to go back, and especially when you're not fully developed. The other idea which could also apply to this position is the idea which I called Fisher's rule in one of my previous videos, which is you wish to trade off opponent's pieces which attack your position. And usually these are pieces which are exactly on your half of the board, but sometimes those are pieces which are located a little bit further, like in this position white has no pieces on your side of the board. However, this knight on e4 is still attacking your side of the board, and it is annoying. Now, in such positions, usually it is better to neutralize that attacking piece that attacks your side of the board. Just because even if there is no immediate danger, usually that piece is a source of constant troubles. And sooner or later, it can result into something unpleasant. Therefore, it is prudent, usually, to trade it off straight away and to avoid any issues. Like, you can trade it off like this and then slide back to h7. Like, luckily you had this h6 move played in the past. And after this, knight d7, completing your development, and life's okay, all right? So that is also a prudent approach where you don't have to worry about anything that your opponent can possibly do because his pieces are mostly far away from your territory and they're not threatening you, right? In most cases, like, his pieces are on the last 3 ranks of the position besides this bishop, which is not very active anyways, and therefore you can feel secure. Back to the game, black played bishop e7 to cover the bishop and this knight, and white responded with knight g3, hitting this bishop on f5. Black replied rook e8. Why not to move the bishop away? Ah, okay, got it. He was worried about bishop takes e6, right? And if you capture, then queen takes with an attack of the king and bishop. And so if the rook covers, well, I would continue with something like this. Looks scary, although black can still move the bishop somewhere, like this, and guard the rook, and the game goes on. It's not that easy how white can continue his attack. Maybe black is just fine. Well, anyways, I agree that it looks scary, at least at first, and therefore I understand that black wanted to avoid that. But there is another rule which I also learned the hard way. I remember there was once a game where I was maybe a master or grandmaster already, don't remember, and I lost the game when my queenside pieces was still not developed like this. And after the game, my coach told me, like, Igor, it's okay to lose games, everyone does, but you should never in your life ever lose a game with your queenside pieces not being developed. Like, that is completely unacceptable. And I got it. Like, basically, ugly moves are indeed ugly. I understand it sounds like common sense, but if you look at games of, let's say, Carlsen, like, I'll say something controversial. Like, he's not the greatest guy when it comes to calculation and tactics. Of course, compared to other top GMs. For example, if you look at some videos where he's offered to solve tactical puzzles, like, he's usually not the best guy to solve a puzzle. Other GMs usually do it faster and better. Like, I mean, some of them. But he rarely blunders in reality. Why so? Because he's got this very well-developed positional understanding, which just tells him which moves are ugly. And he understands that ugly moves are rarely good. They are usually indeed bad. So we should avoid that. And therefore, like rook e8, the move that he played in the game, I got the point. He wanted to guard the bishop so that after this trade, you know, the bishop is not hanging. But overall, that is such an ugly change of the position, because now these pawns are doubled. The bishop is now very active. It's previously been barricaded by the pawns, but now it's no longer the case. White is now putting pressure down the e-file with his queen and rook, which are now also being much more active than before. And there are probably numerous ways for white to continue his attack here. And therefore, black wanted to avoid, like, some little trouble, but that is just so bad. Like, the transformation of the position is so bad that I would definitely think twice or 3 times before playing a move like this. Like, you certainly need to consider moving the bishop away. Even if bishop e6 looks scary, you gotta take some time and calculate it, because otherwise you just end up with such a bad losing position that it's really hard to get back after that. So rook e8, the move which you basically never wish to play. It's like the very last resource. If nothing else works and you're absolutely sure about this, that is the move that you settle for, knowing deep down inside that after this basically you're going down. So rook e8, probably a bad mistake. White traded on f5, and then he played bishop f7. Really nice. So he's calling the king out, and then follows with queen e6 check. Okay, the king goes, and now white did something pretty cool. He played queen takes f5, which is indeed brilliant. Now, modern day 1600 rated players are very impressive. Kramnik would be like, should I start the procedure? Anyway, the point is king takes f5 is not an option because knight h4 is literally a checkmate in one move. Like, that's crazy. Queen takes f5, very strong. Black went back with king to f7 and now knight h4. Okay, makes sense. He wants to play one of these moves, probably queen e6, followed by knight g6 checkmate. Therefore, black has no time for development. If black were to play something like this, there would be this checkmate. Again, very well done by white. And that is why black played king g8. White continued with queen to g6. Okay, now bishop takes h6 is a threat indeed. And black played king f8 to avoid this. Oh, you can see that there are some common themes that occur over and over again within the same game, right? We talked about previously that the moves that seem bad usually are bad, all right? So running around with your king, like, unless it is like totally forced and there is no other option, clearly cannot be a good idea, especially when you've got queenside pieces not taking part in the game. So I would definitely consider finishing development, because that is, again, the priority of the opening. That's what you should always be thinking about. Every move of the opening, until your development is finished, you should ask yourself, like, can I develop? And that should be the first move that you consider. So bishop takes h6, again, I understand is scary, but you can just go bishop f8, and the game goes on. It's not easy for white to do something next. Knight e5 is coming to hit the queen, or the knight can just go elsewhere. like your rook is guarded by the other rook now, thanks to you completing your development, and therefore the position remains to be equal, maybe not equal, but at least interesting, and you've got definitely fighting chances here. All right, so instead he played king to f8, white continued with knight f5, and now it's pretty clear that that is probably way too much for black to handle. Queen takes g7 is coming, black played bishop d6, and after bishop takes h6 resigned. I mean, such combos are very easy for your opponents to play, because it's pretty clear that he's attacking a lonely king with all his pieces, and this should be easily winning indeed. So after takes, white will probably take here, and then there are threats all around, so therefore indeed white would be winning here. Alright, so what are the main takeaways, because we talked a lot about different things. So first thing first, I'd say play more active openings, not some dull defensive stuff. Second thing, like backward is awkward. Whenever you move your pieces backward, you gotta think twice, because usually that is a wrong idea. The other thing is, which was like critical actually for both players, is that in an opening you wish to develop, and any move that does not develop your piece or is not a castling should be questioned by you. And from the white perspective, or from the middle game perspective, once the opening phase is over, you gotta ask yourself, how do I attack? How do I move forward and create threats? So at this point, white missed the opportunity to win the game on the spot because he didn't ask himself this question. And finally, going down the line, another very helpful idea is neutralize pieces that attack your territory. Like, it is not a coincidence that ultimately this knight actually caused troubles for black. Remember, it later jumped to g3, took this bishop, and that was the beginning of the end for black. But black missed the opportunity to just trade it off at this point. And instead, he made another error of backward is awkward. He moved his pieces back instead of completing his development. So you can see that in a nutshell, chess is a pretty simple game if you understand these fundamental ideas and you just follow them without overcomplicating. As you can see, there's just a handful of really important ideas that you need to practice and adopt in order to become a strong player. If you wish my help in learning these skills, I've got a course called Level Up Your Chess, and I structured it in a way that even studying just one of the chapters of this course will bring you to the next level. That is my big promise with this course, because I know that my students are often, let's call it, energy efficient and do not wish to spend too much effort, and that is why I designed the course that way. Okay, so if you can find it by clicking the link below the video in the description, and let me know if you have any questions. I'll talk to you in my next videos.